The war goes on in Gaza. Hezbollah has massively escalated its missile attacks from Lebanon. But the new focus has become Judea and Samaria as Palestinian terrorist organizations have massively expanded their terror assault on Israel. Just today, 3 more Israelis were assassinated, were executed at the Allenby border crossing from Jordan. I'll have all the details and the implications going forward for Israel-U.S. relations coming up on In Focus. I feel it necessary to begin this In Focus by telling you what my ulterior motive here is. I want to talk to you about what's called the two-state solution. Everything that happens in Israel these days points to the fact that the two-state solution, which everybody who's everybody thinks is the only way forward, except, of course, for Palestinian terrorists and radical Israeli right-wingers, right? That two-state solution that everybody who's everybody supports may very well be the most destructive concept to have afflicted the Jewish people, and I'll tell it straight, the United States of America as well, since the final solution was all the rage in popular parlance back in the 1920s and 30s. This morning, first thing in the morning, this Jordanian terrorist was bringing in humanitarian aid to Gaza through the Allenby Bridge crossing that connects Jordan with Israel. And he opened fire on the Israelis who were inspecting his vehicles and killed 3 by shooting them basically point blank in the head with a pistol that he took out of his cabin. Okay, so they were just assassinated, 3 of them. Last week, you had a Palestinian terrorist from Fatah who had been serving in the presidential guard of the Palestinian Authority, likely trained by the U.S. military, because the U.S. military trains the presidential guard of the Palestinian Authority, and he was extremely professional. He waylaid a transporting policemen at the Tarkumia Junction in the morning, and he executed 3 policemen. By the way, one of them, Roni Shkori, was the father of Mor Shkori, a policewoman in the Sderot police station who was murdered in the battle for the police station in Sderot on October 7th. So first the daughter was murdered on October 7th, and then the father, 2 policemen killed in the line of duty by Palestinian terrorists. The first one was murdered by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, and the second one by a Palestinian Authority terrorist last week. And then over the weekend, we got the news or the details of the double car bombing that occurred in Gush Etzion last Friday night. So one of them, the first car bombing took place at the gas station in Gush Etzion, which is a major hub. It's basically empty on Friday night because the Israelis who live in Gush Etzion overwhelmingly observed the Sabbath, and so there was nobody there except for the car bomber and the security forces who detected him and interdicted him. And then in the town of Karmei Tzur, and the attempted or the actual car bombing in Karmei Tzur is in many ways even worse, because Karmei Tzur is a community. It's a community in Gush Etzion, in the southern part of the block of communities that I live in. And this bomber, this terrorist, also from Fatah, both of them were from Fatah, which is the ruling faction in the Palestinian Authority. He came in his vehicle, which was a car bomb. He rammed into Karmei Tzur. He drove in, and he got to the center of the community. And Israelis who live in small towns know that on Friday nights, especially if they're religious communities like Karmei Tzur, you have teenagers who just hang out together. They go and they meet in the parks or in the central squares of the town, and they hang out until it's time to go home. After dinner, that's what they do. So on Friday night last week, there were dozens of teenagers that were just hanging out in the town center. And the guy, the terrorist from Fatah, from the ruling faction of the Palestinian Authority, which the United States underwrites to the tune of over $500 million a year, he drove right into the center. He was just meters away from dozens of teenagers who were hanging out, sitting on the grass, sitting on benches. chit-chatting. And he could have just blown him up. And again, by the grace of God, he didn't. For whatever reason, he turned around and started driving back to the entrance of the community. And one of the security officers who was in a vehicle was able to ram him, just have a, attack him from the front on, and collided with his vehicle, neutralized the terrorists. And then he got out. One of his ribs had been broken in the collision, but he got out and he shot the terrorists. And then in the crossfire, the car bomb went off. But he was far enough away from the teenagers to protect them so that they weren't killed. They would have just been killed. If he had detonated his device, they would have been dead. It was a very, very powerful bomb. So that happened. Like, the truck or the car actually got into the community. It was within meters of the youth of that community that were just hanging out, and it was luck. It was dumb luck, or it was God and a miracle that protected them. And of course, the ingenuity and the boldness of the security officer, who decided that the best way to deal with this was to stop him by having a head-on collision, and he drove into him at 70 kilometers an hour, obviously risking his own life to do so. And that's what we have. So he was a Fatah terrorist. The shooter last week at Tarkumia was a former member of the Presidential Guard who was highly skilled in military tactics, likely gained through U.S. training, because the U.S. trains all the people in the force that he served in. And then the second terrorist who carried out the car bombing was also a member of Fatah. So these are all people from Fatah, which, as I just said, the United States supports to the tune of $500 million. And the Palestinian security forces that are aligned with the Palestinian Authority are trained and armed and financed by the United States under this project of the U.S. Security Coordinator for the Palestinian Territories. The person who's serving that position today is a Lieutenant General named Mike Fenzel. And so he has U.S. forces training these Palestinian forces, whose aligned terrorists are now the most active terrorists operating in Judea and Samaria. And last week, they killed 3, and again, by the grace of God, didn't kill dozens more in a doubled car bombing that took place last Friday night. And we're seeing more and more terrorist chatter, terrorist operations. The Palestinian Authority does murder for hire through its pay-for-slay program, which devotes 7% of the Palestinian Authority's GDP, annual budget, to payments to terrorists who are both in Israeli prisons serving their terms, have both terrorists from October 7th, terrorists aligned with Hamas, with Fatah, it doesn't matter. They all get paid, and the more Jews you killed, the higher your salary becomes. If you are killing Jews, then your families receive, whether you're Hamas, Fatah, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Israeli citizen, Palestinian Authority resident, whatever you happen to be, your family gets an annual annuity or a monthly annuity for the rest of their lives from the Palestinian Authority, which is, again, underwritten by the United States. It's underwritten by Israel, which collects all of the taxes that are then for the Palestinian Authority and then transfers them to the Palestinian Authority. So this is the situation. This is what the United States wants. They believe that the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian security forces, are going to be the skeleton of a Palestinian state that's going to take over in Judea and Samaria, and that's going to take over in Gaza. Okay, that's the American plan, right? And here I just want to show you a clip from an interview that U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, gave last week at the INSS, the the Institute for National Security Studies, which is a left-wing think tank that is populated by former senior IDF officers, and they get together and they write position papers about why Israel needs a Palestinian state, and and that's what we need, and they're funded by the United States, by other governments, and by private donors who think that this is the way to go, and this is what they propagate. So Tamir Haiman, the former head of military intelligence, is now the president of INSS, and he interviewed Jack Lew. And I just want to play you a couple of clips from this interview, because I think they point to just how insidious the Biden-Harris administration's policies on the Palestinians are, whether in relation to Gaza or in relation to Judea and Samaria. So in the clip that I'm going to show you right now, he makes two claims about a Palestinian state. The first claim, let's watch it now, relates to, it is a response to the Israeli claim that a Palestinian state after October 7th is a payoff. It's a huge reward for the invasion, for what Hamas did, that if you give these people a state after what they did on October 7th, then you're rewarding genocide. This is his response.
I think Israel is safer if we take the path of continuing to normalize relations and to isolate Iran. I think it's a defeat for Iran in a major way if that happens. I personally think it's a defeat for Hamas because Hamas has paid lip service to a two-state solution, but what it really wants is to have no Jewish state in this country. So I think the price for that will not be easy. It means getting into a negotiation over the future of the Palestinian self-governance at a very painful moment in the shadow of a war.
Okay, so let's just break this down for a second, right? What he's saying is because Hamas doesn't support a two-state solution, but rather a one-state solution, Israel's annihilation, if you get to a two-state solution, you're really hurting Hamas. But here's the question. Who among the Palestinians wants a two-state solution? And the answer is nobody. The answer is that there isn't anybody in Palestinian society who, I don't know, anybody. The vast majority of Palestinians, according to Palestinian opinion polls, they think that a Palestinian state is going to destroy Israel. They're not willing to coexist peacefully with Israel. They're not interested in sharing the landmass west of the Jordan River with a Jewish state. To the contrary, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, who's a supposed moderate and Israel's supposed peace partner in all of this, you know, he does not believe that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. He believes that there should be, this is, you know, what he says to Westerners, that there should be a Palestinian state that's Judenrein, that there are no Jews in it, not one, right? Not one. And his language is redolent with anti-Semitic imagery. Jews' filthy feet are dirtying. The Temple Mount is one of his most infamous ones. But he, you know, this is his entire career of demonization of the Jews, of political warfare against the Jews, of financing terrorism against the Jews. So the pay for slay, murder for hire policy of the Palestinian Authority under his leadership is very much, it's not a deviant action. It's aligned with his entire way of doing business. At any rate, you know, he doesn't support a Jewish state. He supports, if there's going to be a two-state solution, then Israel is going to be a Jewish Arab state. He opposes Zionism. He has been waging political war against Israel, denying that the Jews have a right to self-determination, denying Jewish history, denying the Holocaust. He wrote his PhD on it throughout his adult life. Okay, so that Israel doesn't have a right to exist as a Jewish state, and Jews don't have a right to live in the Palestinian state because, you know, our feet are dirty or whatever. So that's Mahmoud Abbas. And there is literally no constituency for peaceful coexistence, not in Gaza and not in Judea and Samaria, among the Palestinians. And here we get to the point where we have to ask, what's the difference between Fatah and Hamas? And I think in his press conference last week, Netanyahu was asked, I think by a Sky News reporter, about, you know, how he looks at, you know, why it is that on this map that he gave of Gaza, they didn't have Judea and Samaria or the West Bank also marked out, and does that mean that he doesn't support a Palestinian state? And I just want to play you a clip here of what Netanyahu is saying.
You said at the beginning of your speech that Hamas and others in the Middle East want to wipe Israel off the map. You have literally wiped the West Bank off that map. Is that official policy now, that the West Bank doesn't exist?
No, I didn't include the Dead Sea. It's not shown in the map. I didn't show the Jordan River. It's on this map. I didn't show the Sea of Galilee.
But those
it's on
are
that
geographical
map.
features. This is a population of
2
million Palestinians who live there.
Didn't get into that. I was talking about Gaza. There is a whole issue of what to do, how to achieve peace between us and the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. I didn't get into that. That's another press conference. I'll be happy to do it. To wipe out some of the misconceptions and the slanders and lies that are directed at us. We don't intend to drive these people away. They want to drive us away. It's a big difference. You know, every day they target us. You know what they teach in the schools, in the PA schools? They teach exactly the same thing that they teach, the same textbooks, as in same textbooks here in the PA schools as here. Same thing. Israel has to be destroyed, kill as many Jews, pay for slay. The more Jews, the more Israelis you killed, the more you get paid. There's a difference in strategy. You know, Hamas believes that the way to destroy Israel is through outright terror and military confrontation immediately, backed by Iran. It's all part of the Iranian axis. The Palestinian Authority believes that the way to do it is by ICC, by having lawfare, absurd charges leveled at Israel and its leaders, including me. Enormous pressure to drive Israel to indefensible boundaries, where the boundaries would be right here, right next to Tel Aviv, that's it. 8, 10 miles from the sea, and then push to the sea. There's a difference. But the goals are the same. No, I didn't show that, but if you want, Alistair, next press conference, I guarantee you can ask all the questions you want, and I'll give you the answers, the truth, the facts.
Right. So what Netanyahu said, right, is look, there's, you know, Fatah and or the PA and Hamas, you know, they share the same goal of annihilating Israel, and you know, the PA sees it as through political warfare and Hamas through terrorism, et cetera, but basically they're both leading to the same place. Both of them want to corral Israel into a path that will lead to its destruction, because both of them share that goal of annihilating Israel. And here, you know, I just want to point out a new thing. First of all, no, let me just explain it, and then I want to go to the second Jack Lew clip. So, the Palestinian Authority that the U.S. wants to bring into Gaza, that they've been talking about all along, now we know who's supposed to lead it. Last week, in the course of all of the discussions about hostage deal, yes or not, Israeli control over the Philadelphia corridor, yes or no, where Israel stands, where the United States stands, where Hamas stands, going back and forth, and of course the Israeli left joining in the chorus saying that Israel is at fault, that there's no hostage deal, not Hamas that's holding the hostages, and Bibi has to go. Whatever. So a name appeared. The United States has this idea that the United Arab Emirates is going to take control in one way or another of the Palestinian, of the Philadelphia corridor, of the terminal joining Gaza with Egypt, and they're like the good guys, and that it's going to be under the control actually of the Palestinian Authority, and the UAE will sort of be on the side or something like that. And the Palestinian leader who's going to be in charge of the Philadelphia corridor is this man named Mohammed Dahlan. Now, I just want to put up his picture for a second, and I want to tell you a little bit about Mohammed Dahlan. I knew Mohammed Dahlan rather well in the 1990s when I was in the negotiations with the Palestinians during the heyday of Oslo when I was in the army. And Mohammed Dahlan was seen as Arafat's favorite in Gaza. And Mohammed Dahlan was a terrorist. He was quite simply a terrorist, and he served time in Israeli prison because during the mid-'80s, he established what was called the Shabiba, which was the youth movement of Fatah, and they were the ones that were responsible for all the rock throwing and the Molotov cocktail throwing at IDF forces, at Israeli civilians during the Palestinian terror campaign of the late 1990s that was referred to as the Palestinian Uprising or the Intifada. And so Dahlan was arrested during that time, and he was put in jail in Beersheba prison, where he learned Hebrew, like many of the other terrorists who were imprisoned at the Beersheba prison during that period did. And he was there. He shared a cell with his childhood friend, a man named Mohammed Def. So Mohammed Dahlan and Mohammed Def were cellmates in Beersheba prison in the 1980s. And as things would turn out, so Dahlan was Arafat's favorite, and Def was a favorite of Sheikh Yassin, the founder of Hamas. And he was first the deputy of a man named Yahya Ayash, who was also known as the engineer. Yahya Ayash was the one who was behind the early suicide bombings, the first ones that Israel experienced in 1994, 1995. I believe that he was killed by Israel in 1995, and then Mohammed Def, who was his deputy, took over from him. Mohammed Def was killed a couple of months ago in Gaza. He was the commander of Hamas forces in Gaza. He, along with Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza, were the architects of October 7th. They were the ones who built up Hamas's forces. Israel had been trying to assassinate him literally for years, repeatedly, because he was behind. He had, even before October 7th, he had the blood of hundreds, literally hundreds of Israelis on his hands. He's a mass murderer, and he was one of the worst jihadists that Israel experienced, and he was Mohammed Def's cellmate. And Def and Mohammed Dahlan were sort of appointed unofficially by Sheikh Yassin and Yasser Arafat to be negotiators after the establishment of a Palestinian Authority in 1994 and the Palestinian Authority's takeover of Gaza, to put together a sort of modus operandi between the Palestinian Authority that was established, that was ostensibly Israel's peace partner, and Hamas, which was supposed to be, according to the Oslo Accords, Fatah's enemy. Okay, and so what was the relationship going to be like at this time? And Arafat had appointed Dahlan as the security chief of what was called the Preventive Security Service, and they were sort of the secret police, and the very key node in the terror infrastructure, the terror/security infrastructure that Arafat made up. And the Israeli generals, the ones who are out on the street today screaming that Bibi has to go, and like behind a lot of the chaos that we're seeing, the ones that were with me in the talks, they were just enamored of Dahlan because he was very urbane. He always wore very beautiful designer clothes, and he smoked very fancy cigarettes, and he just seemed very cool, and he spoke Pidgin Hebrew, and they loved it when the Palestinians spoke Hebrew to them. So it's like a very provincial way of looking at things, but that was true. And so he was a senior Palestinian negotiator on security issues with Israel, but it works out that he was also negotiating side deals with Hamas while he was leading the security negotiations towards the deals for Israeli redeployment outside of Gaza, expansion of Palestinian Authority power in Judea and Samaria subsequent to the establishment of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza and in the city of Jericho in 1994. So he was like the key guy. And he was also supposedly behind the coordination between the IDF and the Shabak on the Israeli side and the PA and its security services on the other for joint operations to quell terrorism. So what was in the deal that he made with Def? The deal that he made with Def, and this was back in 94, was that they would have a division of labor. So the Palestinian Authority was waging political warfare against Israel through the Oslo process, which later was referred to by PLO leader Faisal Husseini as a Trojan horse to bring this enemy entity, this terror army, into the heart of Israel. And then from the heart of Israel, it would be waging war to annihilate Israel through jihad. And Hamas, which did not accept the Oslo Accords and did not accept Israel's right to exist, and maintained and massively expanded its terrorist operations against Israel with all of the armaments and personnel that were brought in to Judea and Samaria and Gaza in the framework of the Oslo Accords. So what they agreed to at the initial agreement that I was aware of was that Hamas was going to carry out terrorist operations from areas that Israel had not transferred to the authority of the Palestinian Authority in order not to embarrass and to provide plausible deniability to Arafat and Dahlan that they didn't know anything about it, that they're not in charge, that places like Ramallah, for instance, the IDF was still in charge of security, not the Palestinian Authority, so there were a lot of terrorist attacks that came out of Ramallah or carried out in Ramallah, etc. In October of 2000, just like a week or two after the beginning of the Palestinian terror campaign against Israel that started at the end of September of 2000, you had, I think that's when it was, you had an IED attack in Gaza against a school bus. It was detonated underneath a school bus that was taking children from one of the communities in Gush Katif to school in a nearby community. And luckily, nobody was killed because it was an armored school bus. But from the damage of the blast, several of the children lost limbs. So they didn't die, but their legs were blown off. So like in one family, the Cohen family, for instance, you had 3 children who lost legs in this IED bomb. And then it worked out that the IED itself was carried out by Dahlan's forces at his command. So he was the one who carried out a bus bombing, an IED attack against a school bus filled with Israeli children in Gush Katif or in Netzarim Junction, I can't remember anymore, in October of 2000. That was Dahlan. So he's a terrorist. He's a murderer. And the thing about the deal that the PA wrought at the outset of the Oslo Accords with Hamas is that it's been maintained throughout. So during the terror campaign from 2000 to more or less 2004, not only did Fatah terrorists carry out just as many and in some cases more terrorist attacks against Israelis than Hamas or Islamic Jihad did, at the outset they put together these cells called the Popular Resistance Cells that contained operatives from Hamas, Fatah, and Islamic Jihad working together, conducting joint attacks against Israelis. So from a perspective of the terrorism itself, they've always operated in cooperation together. You've had Hamas terrorists who are being hunted now by the IDF in places like northern Samaria, and what they do is they run to Palestinian Authority bases in these towns and surrender to them so that the Palestinian Authority is protecting them from the IDF and blocking the IDF from either killing or capturing them. Because then you have to go through this whole extradition process, and it's all a lie. We've been through this for the past 30 years. The Palestinian Authority says that they're in jail in the Palestinian Authority, and Israel can't touch them because the PA has meted out justice against them, and they've really been drafted into the Palestinian security forces, which again are trained by Lieutenant General Mike Fenzel and his people from the U.S. Embassy. Okay, so that's what's happening now in northern Samaria, and that's what's always happened. So that deal that they made of cooperation, it's also a division of labor. So the Palestinian Authority is not only does Fatah carry out terrorist attacks, and in the case of the shooting, the assassination of the policeman at Tarkumia Junction last week, it was apparently a former member of the Presidential Guard who carried them out. But aside from the terrorism, aside from the financing of terrorism by the Palestinian Authority through the murder for hire, pay to slay program, you also have a division of labor in the sense that Hamas is the leader in the invasion of Israel. Fatah forces, as we've shown you, participated in October 7th invasion and slaughter as well, and the kidnapping and the murder, mutilation of bodies, the rapes, the sadism, etc. But they were an auxiliary force. But also, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, is behind all of the so-called lawfare being carried out against Israel. So it's true that South Africa was the one that that complained to the International Court of Justice and claimed that Israel is carrying out a genocide in Gaza, but the whole preparation for that claim against Israel was prepared by the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority is behind all of this lawfare, also at the International Criminal Court against Israel. They were the ones who, have been constantly submitting complaints against Israel for war crimes to the ICC since they illegally joined, and the ICC illegally accepted the Palestinian Authority as a member state signatory of the Rome Treaty that makes nation states members in the International Criminal Court. That's all been the Palestinian Authority. And all of this, by the way, all of these actions, all of this lawfare against Israel, they're all material breaches of the Oslo Accords that the Palestinian Authority was established through. So it's like a joke. So they do the political warfare. We're having the UN General Assembly is convening later this month in New York, and there are going to be a whole slew of anti-Israel efforts at the UN, both to upgrade the Palestinian Authority's membership to a full member state and to take action against Israel, declare that Israel is carrying out genocide, enact or call for sanctions against Israel at the General Assembly, at the Security Council, at the UN Human Rights Council, etc. So all of these things are being propelled forward by the Palestinian Authority, all in material breach of the Oslo Accords. So they're carrying out the political warfare and enabling, facilitating, participating in the terrorist operations against Israel as well. And this is Dahlan. So Dahlan was the architect of this entire structure of relations between Hamas and Fatah at the outset of the Palestinian Authority with his friend Mohammed back in 1994 when he was the commander of the preventive security services in Gaza. And now the United States wants to bring him in under the cover of the UAE, where he's been living for the past 15 years or so years, so that he'll come in and they'll do this. And why is it that they want this so badly? Why is it so important that they bring in Dahlan, who, because he lives in the UAE, is considered moderate, and because the Israeli generals who fell in love with him because of his pidgin Hebrew in the Oslo talks still love him today and insist that he's a moderate, right? It's because they want to preserve the structure of a Palestinian state. They want to force Israel to continue to abide by the idea that the final goal in everything that's happening vis-a-vis the war in Gaza, vis-a-vis what's happening in Judea and Samaria, is the establishment of a Palestinian state in these areas. And now I want to go to the second clip of Jack Lew.
I don't think it means something that is going to put Israel at risk. I mean, we've said all along, there cannot be an armed Palestinian state. We've made clear that Israel has to be part of any process of recognizing an entity that will provide self-governance to the Palestinian people. And I think there will have to be a willingness to get into a conversation where at the end of a process, there's an openness to there being a Palestinian, I have to say the word state, because I think if you don't say state, I don't think you probably get where you need to go.
So what is he saying here? It's really interesting, actually, because Tamir Haiman is a leftist, and he has basically been trying to carry out a totally subversive foreign policy against, the prime minister forever. Like he's been meeting, I don't know, with Arab leaders as an independent contractor for Israeli foreign policy for months, and he has this think tank in Tel Aviv and all of the rest of it. So Tamir Haiman, right, he's actually trying to give very gently this pushback to Jack Lew. And he says, here the Israelis think, it's unreasonable. How are you going to sell it? And so Jack Lew here says to him, right, well, it'll be a demilitarized Palestinian state. Oh, really? How are you going to enforce that? Well, you can't enforce that, right? Because you want Israel away from the international barriers. You're saying, we're going to have, Americans are going to monitor it. Who? The same Americans who are paying and arming and training Palestinian terrorists who then turn around and kill Jews with their weapons? Who's going to prevent it from being militarized? The only force who can do that is Israel, and you definitely don't want Israel there, right? That was the Kerry plan. That's the current plan. We're going to put, highfalutin, high-tech sensors at the border, whether it's with Jordan, so that Israel removes itself from the Jordan Valley, doesn't have an Israeli presence at the Allenby Bridge crossing, for instance, right? Or at the Rafah terminal with Egypt, so that the Palestinian state that they want so badly is going to have two international borders, not one small with Egypt, 14 kilometers long, and one over 100 kilometers long with Jordan. Oh, wonderful, right? Oh, joy. But it's going to be demilitarized. How do we know? Because Jack Lew tells us that he's our friend and he's going to do it. And what he says here, right, in this section of the talk, they're actually discussing the conditions for normalization of relations with the Saudis. The Saudis won't accept normalization with Israel unless Israel agrees to be corralled into this idea, this vision of a Palestinian state. So this isn't idle talk. What they're essentially saying is that Israel isn't allowed to take any action that would defeat Hamas, that would make it impossible to maintain the fiction that there's going to be a Palestinian state, or force Israel to maintain allegiance to a strategic goal that's antithetical to its very existence. We're saying to you, America is saying to Israel, you have to accept in principle that even if it's far off, you're not going to do anything to undermine the future establishment of a Palestinian state. That means no permanent Israeli control over the international border between Gaza and Egypt, the Philadelphia corridor, which means the rearmament of all the Palestinian entities inside of Gaza. It means the establishment or the reestablishment of Palestinian Authority control under Dahlan, Mohammed Def's best friend, who has been collaborating with Hamas since 1994, right? He'll be the titular figurehead Palestinian Authority person, and of course you'll maintain some kind of interim control, but it's only in order to pass it off to Dahlan, right? That's the idea. It's all to push Israel there. And then in Judea and Samaria, I want to show you a clip of what happened last week. So this week, a trucker from Jordan came in, opened fire, and I would assume he's Palestinian because most Jordanians are, and opened fire on Israeli personnel and executed them. He shot them at short range and he murdered them, right, in cold blood, right, from his truck. Okay, that's what happened today at Allenby. So look at what happened last week at Allenby. What do we see here? What we see here are Israeli forces at Allenby crossing who are asking to inspect a truck of so-called humanitarian aid going into Gaza, okay, from Jordan. It's supposed to go from the Allenby crossing through Tarqumiyah and from Tarqumiyah in the South Hebron Hills, cross Israel and into Gaza through, I think it's the Kerem Shalom crossing into Gaza, and that's the humanitarian aid from Jordan. Who's inspecting it? Well, look, that's what this guy was trying to do. The Jordanian driver of this truck wouldn't allow him to do so, so he shot the wheel of the truck in order to prevent them from proceeding on their path without allowing Israel to check the truck's contents inside. And what happened? Well, they changed the tire and they went on to Gaza, but that's not all. That Israeli soldier who was doing his job and trying to inspect a truckload full of goods going into Gaza was put under criminal investigation and suspended from his duties because he was overly aggressive in carrying them out. And this is something that we're seeing constantly in Judea and Samaria. Under enormous pressure from the United States, Israel is curtailing its military operations. The United States has threatened to sanctions entire military units inside in the IDF that operate in Judea and Samaria if the United States comes to the conclusion, based on allegations by Palestinian terrorists or people aligned with Palestinian terrorist groups, that they're conducting operations that undermine the two-state solution. I talked about this, you guys. If you haven't watched my interview with Professor Eugene Kontorovich last week, you have to watch it, about the pernicious, the insidious nature of the sanctions regime in Judea and Samaria. And so Israeli soldiers and Israeli military units, Israeli commanders are afraid to take aggressive action against Palestinians in Judea and Samaria lest they find themselves under U.S. sanctions or under criminal investigation of the military police of Israel, operating at the guidance of the Military Advocate General's unit, who is terrified of the United States and wants to impress them about how serious Israel is at curtailing the operations of overzealous soldiers, whether in Gaza or in Judea and Samaria. So, for instance, last week there was a report that soldiers operating in Samaria, seeing Palestinians illegally infiltrating sovereign Israel, crossing the line and going into, Afula and places like that, where they can carry out terrorist attacks, that they're afraid to arrest them or to stop them. Sometimes you have to shoot somebody in order to stop him, just like this soldier shot at the tire. They're afraid to do that. They're not stopping them because they're afraid of getting arrested if somebody gets hurt. Okay? Last Friday at Kfar Etzion, at Gush Etzion Junction, at the police at the gas station, everybody was afraid to stop the terrorist because he was running around half naked and he didn't appear to be armed. Of course, he had just been driving a truck that was laden with explosives to blow up a bunch of Jews, but they were afraid to take action against him because they couldn't see a firearm, and so if they shot him in the knee, they could get in trouble. That's what they were afraid of. And in the end, he was running around like crazy. And when he saw that nobody was shooting at him, he started lunging towards people. And they ended up shooting him. I don't know how many people shot him at once. And they're all terrified of getting arrested. And there was massive, almost fratricide, where because of the crossfire, all of the injuries of Israeli forces at the scene were caused by friendly fire. Okay, so that's what happened, because everybody's so hesitant and afraid that nobody quite knows what to do with this terrorist who is either on the lam or about to try to strangle somebody or pull out a gun that you didn't see or an ice pick and kill somebody. But you're afraid to do anything because you're afraid of being put under a microscope, of having criminal probes opened against you, because it's happening over and over again. And the reason why it's happening is U.S. pressure. So the United States, in order to protect the Palestinian Authority, is criminalizing the IDF, is criminalizing Israelis who live in Judea and Samaria, and work actively to undermine the possibility of the establishment of a Palestinian state by farming state lands in Judea and Samaria that the Palestinians want to seize illegally, which is what's happening everywhere where you don't have Jewish farmers operating on state land. So these people are increasingly finding themselves either under threat of or under actual sanctions of the U.S., having all of their bank accounts frozen, obviously not able to come into the United States, their immediate families also not able to help them, having their bank accounts frozen. Nobody can help them without having their bank accounts frozen by the United States. And as Eugene Kontorovich said, this has never happened to a U.S. ally in the past. Never. There are more Israelis under U.S. sanctions than people carrying out actual genocides in the Congo or whatever. I mean, like even North Koreans, there are fewer North Koreans under U.S. sanctions than Israelis. So that's these kinds of draconian actions that are being taken against Israelis, Israeli soldiers, Israeli civilians by the U.S. Threats against Israel that they're not going to provide us arms under the Leahy law, which was actually passed with Israel in mind by Patrick Leahy, who was an Israel hater in the Senate. All of these things are having an effect on the ground, and as Professor Kontorovich said last week, they're going to get Jews killed, right? Because people are afraid to take actions in their own defense. And today, 3 people were executed at Allenby Junction a week after a soldier was being punished for shooting at the tires of a truck that refused inspection. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that we're experiencing now, and it's all the result on the ground of this corralling Israel by the United States into the straitjacket of the two-state solution. So Israel is unable or being denied the right by the United States to achieve its war goals of annihilating Hamas, because the United States keeps putting in more and more outside actors, and particularly the Palestinian Authority, saying you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. We have all these great ideas of what we can do in order to defeat Hamas on the ground, and none of them are being adopted because of U.S. pressure. And then here's the last clip that I'll show you of Lew that I hadn't planned on showing you, talking about how the United States has been intervening all along to curtail Israeli military operations in Gaza. And here I just want to play you this clip. It's a little bit longer than the other ones, but just it's extraordinary in the message and the insidiousness of its message. Just watch this one too.
We were very clear that we were worried about the Rafah campaign. We saw 2 million people in a place where they had nowhere to go easily, where any kind of military campaign along the lines of Gaza City, Khan Yunis, or the Central Camp would have had devastating consequences. There was a process over months to prepare and then move people, have a place for people to go. It hasn't been perfect. It has still issues that are difficult to manage, but it provided a way for most people to get out of harm's way. And then there were conversations between the U.S. military and the Israeli military, between U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence, where I don't think it's an overstatement to say the IDF rethought its battle plan and went about the fight in Rafah in a very different way. To me, rather than focus on the fact that it took some time to work through that, that's demonstration of the strength of the relationship, where our best thinking is shared and it's taken advantage of. It has an effect on execution. And when I hear it described as kind of we were wrong, I think we were very right, and I think it had effect on how it was done. And I think Israel is in a stronger position with the United States and the world because it did it in a way that we encouraged, while we didn't and will never take responsibility for making the decision of what Israel does when it does it. We can only offer our advice. Israel makes its own decisions in its own defense.
So what's the point here? And why am I saying it's all about the two-state solution? Because basically, what he's saying is, we're not going to give you weapons, right? We're not going to support you militarily unless you curtail your operations to be aligned with our demands, right? In Rafah, in Khan Yunis, in the central camps, in northern Gaza, everywhere. We have intervened with Israelis' operations, and they've only been carried out after they've changed their operational model to align with our demands. And the demands are always go light. It's always, protect these civilians, but all of the infrastructure that Hamas has built is in UNRWA installations, it's in schools, it's in hospitals, which the United States immediately says have to be rebuilt. Well, who's going to be rebuilding them? Hamas. So the United States has been all along pushing these statements, pushing these actions that are all maintaining Hamas's regime in power, that are all undermining Israel's ability to achieve its war aim of destroying Hamas on the ground and maintaining in perpetuity the situation where Gaza isn't a threat to Israel, and all in order to establish a Palestinian state, which the United States says you cannot abandon under any circumstances, and you have to do A, B, and C in order to ensure that we can maintain the fiction that there's a moderate Palestinian out there, and until he comes forward and makes peace with Israel, you're not allowed to do anything to defeat the terror armies, whether the Palestinian Authority or Hamas. And that means that you're going to continue to absorb the murder of your people, because all of these people, the Fatah terrorists, the Hamas terrorists, the Palestinian Authority officials, the terrorists in suits in the Palestinian Authority, and on and on and on, all of them are dedicated to the same proposition, which is that Israel has to be wiped off the map. They all want to do it. They're all advancing that goal through their operations, whether it's through lawfare, whether it's through political warfare, whether it's through actual terrorism, whether it's through land seizure, stealing land in Judea and Samaria, or invading Israel and carrying out a one-day genocide on October 7th. It's all geared towards achieving the exact same goal. All of them share it. And then, so that's a problem on the ground in Israel. It's also a problem because the minute that you say that everybody who's everybody wants a two-state solution except for radical settlers on the Israeli right and Palestinian terrorists on the other side, you're not only, you're drawing, and this is perhaps one, it's all insidious, but this is particularly insidious, is that you're constantly drawing a moral equality between Israeli Jews who don't want to be annihilated and Palestinians who want to annihilate them. So rather than see the Palestinians who seek the annihilation of the Jewish state and the Jewish people, and the Jews who want to defend against that prospect, you're making it socially difficult, right, for Israelis and Jews abroad and people who support Israel who are not Jewish outside of Israel to recognize how dangerous the two-state solution is, that there is no such thing as a two-state solution, that using that two-state solution lingo means empowering Palestinians in their goal of annihilating Israel, since there is no Palestinian partner. By taking actions to force Israel to accept the finality of a two-state solution, that it can't take any actions today in the here and now or for the past 30 years that would undermine prospects for the establishment of a Palestinian state in the future, then that means that Israel has to allow the Palestinian terrorist organizations in its midst, this Trojan horse that's inside of the palace in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. You have to allow it to grow. You have to allow it to maintain control over territory. You have to allow it to maintain control over arms, to raise its armies, to indoctrinate its children and its entire population to jihad and genocide, which is exactly what's happened, because any action to the contrary will undermine the two-state solution, and that's sacrosanct, and you can't do that because everybody who's everybody knows that that's the only way that you can go about doing business in the Middle East. So it hamstrings Israel, but it also draws this moral equivalence between Israelis who realize that this is a racket and that this is a genocidal racket that does nothing except undermine Israel's ability to protect itself, and the people who are killing Jews. And when that happens, you see that if you look, for instance, at the major Jewish organizations in the United States, and it's not just in the United States, it's in England, it's in Australia, it's in other countries around the world, they all say the same things. They're all saying, well, we want a two-state solution. We're pro-peace. We want peace. We want a two-state solution. We don't think, we believe in territorial compromise, meaning kicking Israelis who live in Judea and Samaria out of their homes the same way that Israelis were kicked out of their homes in Gaza and in northern Samaria 19 years ago in 2005. Right? We're for that. Why, by the way, is the IDF carrying out so many operations in northern Samaria? Because of what happened in 2005 that made parts of that area Judenrein, and so all the places that used to be Israeli communities have been taken over by Hamas and Fatah and all the rest of them. And that's what's enabled them really to become so powerful, these terror forces, these terror armies in northern Samaria, is because of the expulsion of the Jews from northern Samaria in 2005, the same way that we've seen in Gaza. I mean, you see parades, you see operations carrying out in Jenin that look very much like what happened in Nahal Oz and in Kfar Aza, and more generally in Gaza since 2005, because there's so few Israelis, there's so little IDF operations there because there are no Israeli communities there to protect, and no Israeli communities there protecting the land. So, so you have all of these Jewish organizations saying we support a two-state solution, and then they don't do anything when you have the United States of America treating Israel like a terrorist state, like a narco-terrorist state, and putting sanctions on innocent Israelis who have committed no crimes, who have carried out nothing that is in any way violent, engaged in no violent activities, and yet they're sanctioned and they're essentially transformed into non-persons because of U.S. sanctions on them that take them out of the financial system of Israel and the world, because they undermine the two-state solution, literally, right, through their actions, because, they're trying to help Israel achieve its goals in the war in Gaza. They're trying to protect state lands in Judea and Samaria. Whatever it is, they're killing terrorists too vigorously. I don't know. Whatever it happens to be, they found themselves under the gun of the United States because all of these actions, in one way or another, give Israel an out of the corral of two-state solutions. So there's been no outcry against this unbelievably hostile action by the Biden administration because it's supposedly being carried out against violent settlers. And everybody who's everybody knows that you got to hate violent settlers. The fact that they're neither violent nor settlers is neither here nor there. Once they're called violent settlers, you have the vast majority of communal life in the diaspora, the leaders of it, not willing to say anything. Not willing to condemn it, not willing to fight it, not willing to take them to trial, nothing. Because everybody has gone this way. Now you have in all of these campuses, right, where you have these encampments and other actions being carried out against Jews on campus by Hamas supporters, whether the red part or the green part of the Red-Green Alliance, you have very little actions, very little offensive actions being carried out by Jewish organizations against them. They should be rendered illegal. Students for Justice in Palestine it should be illegal. Democratic Socialists of America should be illegal. All of these groups are providing material support for terrorism, and they're also hate groups that are propagating hatred against Jews in the United States on campuses and off campuses. So all of these groups should be rendered illegal, and the Jews should obviously be the ones pushing this, except that they've been so trained by this idea that there are parts of Israel that are really bad, and objecting to the settlements, for instance, is totally legitimate. What does it mean, objecting to the settlements? It means wanting to see the annihilation of the homes of 500,000 Jews, or more if you include Jerusalem, which, of course, the United States does, certainly under the Biden-Harris administration. So the Jews aren't defending those because you have a moral equivalence between people who oppose Palestinian statehood, who are Jews, and the Palestinian terrorists who are killing Jews under the guise of being peace partners or whatever. So they're not willing to go to bat again because they say, well, they have a point. Some aspects of Israel are really bad and unacceptable, and we don't want to be identified with the settlers. We don't want to be identified with people who oppose Palestinian statehood. We want peace. We're for peace, and they try to put their opposition to people calling for the annihilation of Jews under this whole we want peace thing. How about we just don't want Jews to be killed thing? Well, no, because you're not allowed to say that, because if you just say that, then you're on the extreme radical right-wing part of the spectrum. And here, the last part of this little sermon or whatever that I want to talk about is I want to talk about the role that the Israeli left is playing in it. So it was really interesting to see this interview with Tamir Hyman and Jack Lew, because Tamir Hyman was he looked apprehensive in this whole conversation, because Jack Lew also opens it up by explaining that the Democrats are really, they're not that fond of Israel anymore. He doesn't say it that way, but he basically says it, and that you have to, if you don't want Israel to become a partisan issue, meaning if you don't want the Democrats to come out and say we hate Israel, then you're going to have to, you're going to have to stop active defense of Israel, because that's what we're going to be demanding. Biden is really the last one who feels it in his kish-kiss, his love for Israel. Everybody comes after him, not so much. So it's not that they hate Israel, God forbid. It's not that Rashida Tlaib hates Israel or whatever. That's all fine. It's not a problem. It's a party. It's just that, they're not that warm and fuzzy, and they have questions. They have a lot of questions, and they're going to keep having questions. They're going to have questions about how you use those 2-ton JDAMs. They're going to have questions about how you use those F-35s. They're going to have questions about how you use the F-15s. They're going to have questions about how you use the tank shells and the artillery shells and the bullets and the assault weapons, which is why they haven't sold us assault weapons, assault rifles, which is why they've been curtailing the number of bullets. They've been they were slow walking the artillery shells and the tank shells, et cetera, throughout this war. Oh, it's going to be much worse in the future, and you guys have to just, you have to just fly right. You got to do what we want, And if you don't, well, you're going to become partisan, meaning we're going to abandon our support for you completely, including lip service, all right, which is really what we're getting now. And having said that, that was his opening, and then he went on. You have to stay with the program. You have to keep supporting a two-state solution. And we're going to give you a cherry on top of normalization with Saudi Arabia, which is, of course, not really going to happen. But, who cares, right? We're putting it out there, right? So, and how dare you say that Palestinian statehood is a prize for terrorism? Because it is. But, so Tamir Hyman's kind of trying to hide just how hostile Jack Lew is throughout this entire passive-aggressive exchange that they're having, right? And there's a reason for that. It's because the left-wing radicals who are out on the street, and, not very many, but they pretend that there are many, and they stand a meter apart so that it looks like the crowds are 10 times larger than they are, and then they get these aerial photos that kind of hide. So they're saying 250,000 people, and there's really more like 2,500 people, but whatever. So that's what they're doing. And here I just want to show you what it is that the people on the ground in on Kaplan Street or whatever in Tel Aviv are doing. So here I just want to show you this picture. Okay, it was on Israeli TV. That's where I saw it last night on Channel 14. You see, it's these IDF soldiers in Rafah, in Rafah, and there are 4 soldiers here. And 2 of them are blowing the shofar, because we're in the Hebrew month of Elul, and that's when you start the Slichot services if you're Sephardic, and you blow the shofar every morning. So they're blowing the shofar on the street in Rafah, and it's kind of cool, right? So that made, and then there's this emaciated dog in the background. I wouldn't want to be a dog in Gaza. Anyway, so this channel and telegram from Gaza says, it's the occupation forces are blowing the shofar on Nat Street in Rafah. Okay. And then this woman named Nava Rosalio. Nava Rosalio is one of the most famous of the Kaplan forces out there who have been, rioting against the government since the outset of the government. And Nava Rosalio is one of the most outspoken, most radical of them, calling for violence, supporting violence, etc., in the protests against the government, etc. So she writes here in this tweet, she says, this isn't this isn't the people's army. This is the army of God, right? Like Hezbollah, like it's a religious extreme because they're blowing a shofar, okay? And then she says, this picture has nothing to do with the goal of protecting Israel's security. It's transforming it into a war of religion. Okay, we were just invaded by forces of jihad, but if we blow the shofar during slichot services in the month of Elul in Gaza, then we're Hezbollah or whatever. But what she wrote in Hebrew is less interesting than who she tweeted it out to. She writes here, Secretary Blinken, the State Department spokesperson. This is the International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court. Joseph Borrell, the EU Foreign Policy Commissioner who hates Israel, U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, Vice President, that is Harris, POTUS, Biden, Department of Defense, et cetera, the spokesman for the EU, Emmanuel Macron, all these people, right? EU Commission. She's like tattletaling. She is saying to them, look at what's happening. It's terrible. Israel is evil. Israel is a terrorist organization. Why is she doing this? The same reason why you have here, you can see these people on the street, they murder 6 hostages, and then you have these radical leftists at Kaplan Street, ostensibly for getting the hostages out. But here, what are they holding up? End the occupation signs. And this is all just the radical left. They want to end the occupation. From their perspective, this is a religious war. It's a war of people who are post-Zionist, opposed to the Jewish state, want Israel to be a non-Jewish post-Zionist state, and the vast majority of Israelis who don't, who want this to be a Jewish state. That's the reason why we live here. That's the reason why we're raising our kids here. That's the reason why we want our grandchildren born here and our great-grandchildren, et cetera, down the line. Because we're Jews and we want to live here. So they're saying, oh, that's bad. That turns it into a religious war if we want this to remain a Jewish state. Because really what you're seeing is, and then they work with the U.S., with FENSL, with the Department of Defense, with the Department of State, being sort of tattletales, saying, look at how bad Israel is. Look at how terrible our soldiers are. Look at how terrible and violent all of these settlers are. Don't you want to sanction them? There have been a bunch of chatter among the Kaplan groups and the WhatsApp calling for U.S. sanctions against policemen and things like that, because that's like their thing. Because what they really want is to end Israeli sovereignty, which is, of course, what Jack Lew is saying. You adapted all of your military plans to align with our demands as a superpower, as your overlord, who says you can't have artillery shells if you don't do this or that or curtail your operations in this city or that city along the lines that we're demanding in order to not defeat Hamas. They all agree. Why is it that they agree? Why is it that they're so why is the left, these activists, why are they so hell-bent on maintaining allegiance to this Palestinian statehood, this two-state solution thing? Because the Jews who are going to get screwed are the ones who have been demonized, are the second half of the moral equivalence with the Palestinian terrorists, right? They're enemies of peace on both sides. Caroline Glick, right? She's an enemy of peace, no different from Yahya Sinwar, God forbid, right? Because both of us oppose a two-state solution. What's the difference between us? Well, I don't want him to annihilate the state of Israel. And I know that that's what he wants. And not just him, the vast majority of the Palestinian people, as they say. The Fatah people, the Islamic Jihad people, the Hamas people, they all want to kill all of the Jews here. They want to annihilate the Jewish state. And yet when you make this moral equivalence between the likes of Caroline Glick and the likes of Yahya Sinwar, and you say she's a hard right person and he is a terrorist and they both are enemies of peace, or they both rejected two-state solution, and nobody in the vast middle, agrees with them, then you're making it impossible for Jews who don't want to be put into the same category as Yahya Sinwar or Yahya Ayash or Mohammed Def, to recognize what's happening here, the insidiousness of it all, the insidiousness of the allegation, because they don't want to be suffering from those same allegations. And since everybody who is respectable agrees with the people who are libeling and slandering the Jews, who simply want to protect the Jewish state from annihilation by, among other things, not letting Mohammed Dahlan or the Palestinian Authority ever take control again over an international border with a third country, right? then you're saying, don't fight. Don't fight Hamas. Don't defend against anti-Semitism on campuses. Don't stand up for yourself. Don't protect yourselves against anti-Semites, because these anti-Semites are going to say that you're a far-right extremist, that you're a radical settler type, that you're an enemy of peace just like Hamas, without recognizing that all the Palestinians are just like Hamas. And all the Jews who don't want to end up like the victims of Hamas and Fatah and Islamic Jihad, right, are also opposing giving them a state, which is why Tamir Hyman was in such a difficult situation, because here's the U.S. ambassador who's Jewish, right, saying you have to remain in this pen, in this bullpen of a two-state solution, and if you're not, right, then you're in trouble. You're not going to get peace with Saudi Arabia, and we're not going to support you. And that's the insidious of it all. That's why I'm telling you that this goal of a two-state solution, which is a chimera, which will never exist because the Palestinians will never accept a Jewish state, not the other way around, is a terrible, terrible, pernicious concept that does nothing to stop Palestinian terrorism. To the contrary, it enables it, it facilitates it. It paved the way for October 7th by giving the Palestinians a state in Gaza for the past 19 years. Right? That's what it did. It enables, it empowers Palestinian terrorists, but it hamstrings the Jews, and it makes it almost impossible for the Jews to protect themselves, as we saw on October 7th. And that's why, if we want to survive in Israel, and Jews abroad want to be able to defend themselves against anti-Semites, it's absolutely necessary that the people who have been too embarrassed to stand up against a two-state solution, to understand that this isn't about peace, it's about the annihilation of the Jews, to finally get with the program, to finally understand the reality on the ground, and to act accordingly, if not for Israel, then for themselves. Anyway, those are my thoughts for today, and I'll talk to you again later, coming up this week. See you soon. Take care.